Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Tonight we're going to talk about artificial intelligence and natural intelligence. And I guess the premise of this talk is that you can't understand artificial intelligence if you don't understand human intelligence and what it means to be human. So we're seeking to understand not just AI, but also the whole cultural, social, psychological, historical, economic context in which AI is being developed, right, and talked about. So this is about understanding who we are and understanding what's happening in our world and how we can understand AI in that context and in the context of human history. The British ethicist Oliver O'Donovan once wrote, "Of a position too familiar to technological society, that of having achieved something that we do not know how to describe responsibly." And in a world that's changing so fast, we face this problem of not really knowing how to think about and describe things that are novel and not well understood, but we have to try, right? So here we are. This is also part of a larger conversation that we're having at this school. This is the third lecture in a series of 4, in which we're thinking about the evolution of consciousness and culture, what it means to be a human, thinking about the process that we've seen humanity go through, where thinking has become more abstract, where culture and society have become more complex and global, where our sense of belonging in the world has become more alienated, fractured, disenchanted, and disconnected, and where mental and emotional and relational health is declining amidst unprecedented material and economic abundance, right? That was the topics of our last couple conversations. And that's the context for AI's emergence also. So let's dive in, assuming no prior knowledge. Artificial intelligence refers to computer systems that are capable of executing tasks that typically require human intelligence by processing massive amounts of data and identifying patterns. They can seemingly make decisions and produce outcomes without explicit programming and can generally improve their performance over time. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. There's many positive uses of artificial intelligence. This isn't about being for or against AI. At this point, that would be like being for or against technology. Asa Raskin talks about using AI to help translate animal speech. I'm sure we all appreciate the fact that we can do voice dictation and create transcripts. I personally use an app called Perplexity, which basically has replaced Google for me. I recommend you check it out. And pretty much anything that utilizes large data sets to find patterns and find useful information is going to benefit from the evolution of AI and from digital computation, basically, which is what AI is. It's a bit of a misnomer. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but we should really just refer to it as digital computation. There's also many uses that we haven't really fully, I think, gotten the benefits of yet, but hopefully we will in the future. Like we could use AI-powered systems to connect people and services, right, through vast networks. We can also use AI sensors to help coordinate our behavior with info that's grounded in real data from the environment, right? Many eco-minded people envision a world of AI sensors that are actually giving us real-time feedback about meaningful things, like trace minerals or something like that. But it's important to note that none of those positive uses or applications depend on any form of super intelligence or general intelligence or being-like agency. And the generative AI that's getting most attention right now, like large language models, they're not actually the most interesting or beneficial application of AI overall. And they might actually be a distraction from the bigger picture of what's going on, which is part of what I'm going to try to convince you of, I guess. But let's talk a little bit about LLMs and how we should think about them. So natural language processing, NLP, is a subfield of AI that seeks to enable machines to use human language. And the recent explosion in the capabilities of NLPs is due to the scaling up in the size of large language models, LLMs, right? So large language models like ChatGPT are pattern matching machines that predict words to be generated based on statistical correlations gleaned from massive amounts of data and the process for images works very similarly. These models are pre-trained on massive data sets and equipped with learning algorithms and optimization routines to complete set objectives, but without explicit instructions for how. So that's what's interesting about them. They're sort of working within the parameters of the algorithm are fine-tuning the parameters of the outputs to try to create more accurate outputs over time, but we can't really trace the beginning to the end. They rely on error backpropagation, which is an algorithm that repeatedly adjusts the model's parameters based on prediction errors and keeps fine-tuning to achieve more accurate outputs over time. So error backpropagation, aka backprop, is sort of one of the main engine algorithms that sort of allows this sort of magic to happen. The models are composed of individual statistical calculations, but when given very large numbers of parameters and data to achieve an output or goal, the output that emerges is not easy to explain because there's no real way to trace the output to any particular data or input. And this is why they are widely referred to as black boxes. I came across that term a lot in my reading about AI. Experts and lay people refer to LLMs as black boxes because no one actually knows what's going on inside of them, supposedly or apparently. And that's partly why our intuition gets easily distorted because we really can't fathom the amount of training data that they use and draw from, right? It's sort of like trying to fathom the size of the universe or the number of stars in the sky. Our computing minds actually don't do that very well. So it's easy to project qualities onto what's happening that aren't actually there because the amount of data that they're pulling from is just so large. But these methods of training and generating outputs necessarily utilize spurious correlations and accidental patterns, because basically any data set they're going to be using is going to create all kinds of correlations and patterns that are not causally related. So the outputs they generate are going to be informed by those sort of statistical aberrations and things that don't really fit together in real life, but might seem like they fit together. So they are inherently unreliable. And a lot of the more technical things that I tried to read about this really did emphasize that in terms of the actual architecture of how they work is what makes them hallucinate or generate things that are not true. So many things that I came across emphasize that we really should not assume that any AI system using statistical methods will be safe in open-ended and real-world situations. We should only use them when we can check every output or in very low-stakes situations, but not for decision-making in the real world. However, the idea is that, more investment, more money, making them bigger and bigger and better will make them better and better, and that some of those challenges will be overcome. That's sort of the idea, and that's why hundreds of billions of dollars are being thrown into making them bigger and bigger. But it does seem that the evidence is piling up, that scaling is already sort of reaching its limits. So over the past few years, we've seen huge growth in the models of ChatGPT. But that does seem to be plateauing, and a lot of experts are agreeing on that. Are not leading to proportionally bigger advances in the quality of the outcomes. And recent developments like time test training or test time compute do not ultimately change the fact that increasing the search space and increasing the data doesn't fundamentally change how they work, and it's not actually moving us any closer to something like human thinking, or anything closer to AGI, or artificial general intelligence, which wouldn't be bound by the limits and inherent unreliability of these large language models. So it seems to me, and to many of the things that I've been reading, that the AI industry really has benefited from sort of a perfect storm of factors that have enabled a little bit of over-promising and a little bit of exaggeration in terms of what's happening and in terms of where we're going. The technical complexity of the systems discourages detailed scrutiny. Financial incentives reward hype. And a media environment really amplifies rather than investigates extraordinary claims. So this narrative, I think, that's out there about AI and the future of AI, it has proved remarkably effective at attracting investment, but it seems that the advertising and the fundraising has skewed our sense actually of what's happening and what's possible. It's also good to know that when ChatGPT was released, it actually was released as a demo without any plans for commercial use. And it was only a very unexpected public excitement and the realization that they could make a lot of money using this that led to them really throwing more money at it and then releasing it to the public. That was never the plan. And the rapid deployment of ChatGPT has led to a sea change in the way that these things are being rolled out and on the over-focus on large language models. And that's a good example of something that I'll talk about a little bit later. It's sort of created this multipolar trap where once somebody is doing it and realizes they can make a lot of money doing it, that creates a lot of economic and social pressure on other people to be in a race with them to get that sort of first mover advantage in a big marketplace, right? So what we're seeing playing out right now are largely economic pressures and factors as opposed to strictly technological or scientific advancements. And on the science and engineering front, one of the more technical people I read, who I enjoyed, David Chapman, really emphasized that very little funding or research or effort is actually being put into understanding the mechanistic interpretability of these machines. People aren't really spending a lot of time and money trying to understand the black box, and they're also not spending a lot of money on ensuring safety for them. That's just not where the focus of the research is. He also points out, someone who's knowledgeable about the sort of history of software and the history of technology. Software history is replete with examples of inferior technologies that sort of achieve lock-in by accident because they get that first mover advantage and they become the way that people do things, and that sort of spreads, and then other things get built on top of that, so it's sort of locked in. That happens a lot. It happens all the time. And that particular thing that gets locked in isn't necessarily the best way to move forward. That's how things accumulate, right? And he sees backprop GPTs as a pretty good example of that. This technology is getting a lot of money and investment and intention, and other things are being built on top of it. But the actual architecture of how these things work is inherently unreliable, and it's actually not the way we're going to get to these step change differences in some sort of AGI possibility. His argument, and the argument of several people, is that what we're doing now is not going to get us there, and the argument that it is seems to be pretty deeply flawed and have clear economic motivations. So those things are important to know, but I think even more important is grappling with the sort of conceptual problems that we're working with as we talk and think about artificial intelligence, which is referred to as things like deep learning, machine learning, neural networks. But these machines are not similar to neural networks in our brains in any meaningful way. And I think talking about them in terms of intelligence and learning and neural networks just increases the confusion that it sort of leads people to think that more is happening than it really is, and it leads us to sort of anthropomorphize or project our agency and consciousness onto these machines, which are really just doing pretty basic digital computation. Chapman notes that AI is basically often used as a vague term for software that does something it's surprising for software to be able to do. That's kind of the catch-all meaning of what AI means for most people at this point. And it's also good to note that the history of artificial intelligence research, it used to be about trying to create an artificial brain, like really trying to understand the way the brain works, trying to understand the way people think, and build something like that. And that was the vision of early artificial intelligence researchers and scientists. And that dream has mostly been given up on. It's just, they were a bit in over their heads, I think. And now it's really shifted to being about replicating the outputs of human language, right? So we're not trying to actually build human-like things anymore. We're trying to just replicate the outputs of human language and then act like that's somehow human-like. But it's a huge category error that we need to understand. And all of the above, like the kinds of AI that I'm describing, all of this is referred to as narrow AI or weak AI, which in itself is sort of an acknowledgement of its limits. In the field, sort of LLMs and GPTs and backprop machines, that's weak AI and narrow AI. Real AI is artificial general intelligence, right? And the idea is that that's what we're moving toward. And the overall aim and justification for the research and the spending and the funding, it's all for this very hypothetical, completely hypothetical and theoretical possibility of some general intelligence. So when people talk about AI, they're literally usually talking about something that doesn't exist, right? It's about the idea of AGI. which is interesting. But what we have are these large language models that are doing what they're doing. So it's just important to kind of make those kinds of distinctions, I think. So part of what I want to convey here is that being able to produce endless amounts of interesting digital content, being able to cheat on your homework really easily with an LLM, these are not the most interesting and important things about artificial intelligence. What's actually important is how tech development is shaping society and how propaganda about and use of AI is changing our thinking and behavior, right? That's actually what's happening, and that's actually the concern that we need to pay more attention to. So let's look more closely at the risks of the current uses and trends. And one of my sources here, some friends of mine who work at the Center for World Philosophy and Religion, they're actually writing a series of books on techno-feudalism and attention, the importance of attention. And one thing that they've offered is just this frame of 3 waves of AI. So the first wave of AI in their sort of framework is AI-powered micro-targeted ads and psychometric profiling, right, which is basically behind social media. So we need to be aware that all of the problems and concerns that we're aware of with social media and our sort of media ecology, that is AI. Like that is AI-powered. That sort of algorithmic funneling and channeling of media and information is AI. Like we've already been living in it for a long time. The second wave is this generative AI that's sort of really coming to the fore now, right? So we've gone from curation of content through AI algorithms to creation of digital content, right? And while the continual improvement of algorithms has been shaping our experience of the world for over a decade, now the algorithms are creating content and they're sort of talking back to us and therefore attracting even more of our attention, right? So our attention capture is actually being increased by the second wave of generative AI. The third wave of AI is the sort of nascent and emergent possibility of a planetary network of surveillance and control, in which large-scale socialization processes are dominated by our reliance on machines. And whether you think that this is possible or probable or inevitable, it's something we have to take seriously, and it's something that we want to avoid. And that's what they have in mind when they talk about techno-feudalism. And those books are not published yet, but I'll highly recommend them when they are. I think the first one will be coming out later this year. So let's talk about wave 1 and sort of what it's done to us and what it's doing to us and with us. So the main use by far of AI is recommender engines, right? The way that we experience media, most of us, even if it's not through social media at this point, it's pretty much co-opted mainstream media as well. And recommender engines exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, and they force us to see reality through recommended links, basically. Social networks are effectively recommender networks, and you see what AI has determined will be most profitable for the recommender network company. Tech companies are effectively advertising technology companies like Microsoft, Google, Facebook, X, Instagram, aka Mooglebook, according to Chapman. They're advertising tech companies, right? The model is based on advertising, and they literally can't stop optimizing for ad clicks. Like there's no executive or board or shareholders who could make the decision to stop optimizing for ads. If they tried, they would be swiftly shown the door, and there'd be a long line of people wanting their spot to make a lot of money selling ads. The incentives are way too strong. We've already sort of lost control of the way that the model works at this point. And when you use these systems, you are responding to incentives of algorithms and in some ways being trained by AI. The media business model is to produce things that AI will recommend or go bankrupt, effectively. And we're all internalizing and sort of semi-consciously learning to conform to social norms that are enforced by these automated moderation systems, right? I read a recent example about Netflix, who's now purposefully dumbing down shows so people can follow along while not paying attention. It's a whole new demographic called casual viewing, right? This is a quote from Harper's. Netflix leadership has begun mandating that shows and movies feature lots of dialogue where characters clearly explain what they're doing and announce their intentions. The purpose is to ensure that users who aren't watching and only partly paying attention can keep up with the story and follow along while distracted. The result is an abundance of exposition by characters recapping things they just did, are doing, or are about to do. As Jaron Lanier points out, social media empires are in fact behavior modification empires, right? So the way we watch movies is different. Watch a movie with anyone under the age of 30, and I'll bet you $5 they'd check their phone at least once. If not, I'd like to shake their hand. So in a way, focusing on LLMs and all the exciting new content that can be created, in a way, I think is a little bit of a sleight of hand to distract us away from all the ways that AI is already working on us and affecting on us sort of on the back end. It's not in our face in the generated content. It's in the way that our whole media environment is being shaped and the way that we're being distracted. So that's sort of the impact of wave one, which many of us are already familiar with and was a big part of our conversation about mental health last time. So wave two and generated content, there's two things I'd like to talk about: cultural degradation and information degradation. So cultural degradation, the Netflix example is kind of one, but also you could look at a piece by The New Yorker last month called The Year in Brain Rot. And it just gives, pretty typical probably examples of just the complete stupidity of a lot of really popular memes and just stuff that mostly kids, but probably not just kids, are sort of spreading around. And just it's silly, but it's also really sad of just the degradation of what counts as worthy of attention nowadays. And another potentially bigger problem is just the degradation of information on the internet itself, as more and more content on the internet is not human generated, right? There's an academic paper called Self-Consuming Generative Models Go Mad, where the researchers studied what happens when the output of generative AI is fed back into the training data, right? So now the content that AI is using to train itself is content created by generative AI. And you get this sort of feedback loop toward less and less connected to reality. And each iteration generates output of worse quality. Another piece from the Times called When AI's Output is a Threat to AI reviews research demonstrating that as AI output contaminates AI training data, future iterations of its output become more and more homogeneous, as well as more detached from reality. So this is actually a big problem that a lot of people are worried about. And there's been bold claims at a certain point, the whole internet will just crash and be worthless because the ratio of AI-generated content will exceed human-generated content, and it will just become so disconnected from reality that we'll kind of have to pull the plug or something. I mean, it's all just silly thoughts and hypothetical future wonderings, because nobody knows really what's going to happen. We've unleashed something that's propagating tremendous amounts of data, and we have no idea what's going to happen as a result of that. It's also good to know that Microsoft and TikTok now actually have publishing companies to publish books that are written by AI. Bot books, I guess you could call them. There's also another tech startup that raised millions of dollars of seed money for AI publishing. So they're going to flood the market. Well, the business model would be to flood the marketplace with books that are generated by AI that cost them almost nothing because you don't have to pay the author anymore. Similarly, Spotify is creating more and more AI-generated music content and just throwing it into people's playlists. It's just free music that they won't have to pay anyone for. And so we're all getting slowly sort of normalized to actually getting exposed to content that's not created by humans, and it's actually really hard to tell. There's no warning label or advertisement on Amazon that tells you when a book's been written by AI. They don't want you to know, obviously. They're trying to sell us AI-generated content, thinking that it's human-generated content. So it's a fundamentally deceptive business model, and billions of dollars are being thrown into this model because it's going to make them a ton of money if people don't care about the difference. So we should be aware that that's happening, I think. It's also important, I think, to note, to step back a little bit and think about the import and implication and meaning of this difference between AI-generated content and human-generated content. I would like to argue that, creativity and creative expression is the expression of something, right? Like, you have to have something inside of you to express. That's what creative expression is. AI does not have anything to express. So in that sense, if we can define the words that way, there's no such thing, like AI doesn't create anything. Maybe we can say it generates digital content, but it doesn't create or express anything. And I think it's a meaningful distinction, and one that people should actually just think about a little bit. So moving on to wave 3, which is where things get really interesting. Ubiquitous technological surveillance is now possible, right? And if you can think of all your favorite and worst despots from history, imagine if they had automated kill webs with drones and sensors and lasers and satellites, right? That probably wouldn't be a good thing. So we need to be careful about AI automated warfare. That is one thing. And if we also need to be worried about human environments that are completely structured and surveilled and controlled by AI systems. And we can look at Iran, we can look at China, we can look at Amazon factories right now to see examples of that, right? So in Iran right now, if you're a woman driving in a car, riding in a car without a hijab on, you can get a notification text on your phone that tells you you have received a ticket. Right now, in this moment, you're receiving a ticket for not wearing your head covering because a facial recognition camera saw you while you were driving, and you're no longer allowed to be in a car for 15 days, and you have a fine to pay. That's happening. Thousands of women. Just being in public, automated facial recognition systems, instant tickets delivered right to your phone. That's not in the future, that's right now. I won't talk a lot about China, but their social credit system is not a good thing. It's a homogenizing social architecture of conformity and compliance that really narrows what people are incentivized to do and how to behave. And there's really strict control around it. And we don't want that to spread, and we don't want anyone living in that situation, in my opinion. I've also read some interesting accounts of what it's like to work in an Amazon factory. It's pretty sad, like the way that they've fine-tuned the timing of everything. There's AI sensors everywhere, cameras everywhere, everything's down to the second, and there's no choice or opt-out from being completely regulated by AI algorithms at every moment of your work life, right? It's not a good way to live. It's not a good way to work. We should be aware that it's happening and think about the implications a little bit. We also should be aware that governments are now relying on AI systems to basically make really life-altering decisions for them. Many states are using AI algorithms to automate judicial decisions, and people have no ability to appeal or contest the rightness or appropriateness of an algorithmically mediated judgment, right? We're in a place of legal decisions that are completely removed from the space of human moral decision making, right? And you can't question it because it's a black box. You literally don't, the judge doesn't know why the algorithm says this person should have 10 years. But they're trusting it to do that because then they're no longer accountable, right? They don't have to decide what the sentence is. They just plug the relevant data into the system. The data says this should be 8 years. And that's literally happening. Loomis versus Wisconsin, a U.S. judge declared that algorithms can be used to determine sentences even if there's no way to verify the data or how the algorithms work. And there was a man that was sentenced to 6 years in prison, even though lawyer review after the fact, like they couldn't figure out how that would be justified in a court of law. There was no questioning it because the law had been set by the judge that you actually can't question the algorithm. A friend of mine sent me a text this morning also about a Washington Post investigation that found 12 of 15 police departments used facial recognition to arrest suspects without any corroborating evidence. And in that pretty small sample, they found 8 wrongful arrests, and 7 of those 8 showed evidence of racial bias. And that's another thing to be aware of because how these systems work is they're literally just recreating the past, right? They're taking the data that they have and then trying to replicate the same patterns that is in the data. So if a certain percentage of a certain kind of person is guilty of something in the past, the correct answer for the algorithm to give you is that that percentage of that kind of person should be guilty of that in the future. Right? That's the basic logic of the architecture of the model. So you're literally replicating the past. You're sort of locked in to the previous data, and then everything that gets generated is an output trying to match that data. So there's no real substantive, meaningful change or evolution that's possible. In the Netherlands, 1,675 children were taken from their parents due to a flawed algorithm to determine child benefits fraud, right? So the government decided that these parents were guilty of child benefits fraud, took their children from them, later realized, oh, that was a mistake. Sorry. Hundreds of those cases were never resolved. In the job market, 2021 Harvard Business Review study showed that millions of well-qualified applicants are being screened out for unclear and unexplainable reasons. You just put them through the system. It spits out who you should interview and who you shouldn't. That's a real time saver. It's hard to say no to that, right? I don't have to look through all those resumes. But it's a black box. You have no way of adjudicating why it made that decision. You just trust it and you interview the people it tells you to interview. Save yourself a few hours. This is what people are doing. It actually says that the majority of all resumes are being weeded out by algorithmic filtering at this point. AI automated billing software in hospitals leads to more expensive services. For obvious reasons, they're incentivized to maximize the profits for doctors and hospitals. In Michigan, there was an unemployment benefit fraud. Over 20,000 cases were falsely flagged. People lost benefits for years based on facial recognition that was later shown to be mistaken. So there's so many of these examples. It's already happening. People are handing over their agency, their decision-making, and their power to these automated machines. They're trusting them, even though the experts are saying, do not trust them. But it's happening. So somehow we have to get this message across, and we have to actually reclaim our agency in these meaningful ways. So what the heck are we thinking? What are we trying to do? How does our collective behavior reflect sort of how we think about social progress and the purpose of technology, right? I think those are fair questions. So I'll try to answer them. I think we have to take a step back and actually, so outside of AI, and just think more broadly about, again, like the evolution of society, technology, like what the heck is going on. And really, at the root of many of our social problems, I think, lies an immature view of progress itself. Whatever's not included in our definition and measurement of progress is typically harmed in the pursuit of that progress. When we measure and optimize progress according to narrow metrics, we cause a lot of damage that's not accounted for in our statistical models, right? And there's, again, so many examples: artificial fertilizers, leaded gasoline, VOCs, PFAS, forever chemicals. We've created and done a lot of things that have caused a lot of harm, and the people who have made a lot of money doing it have not accounted for the harm economically. Those are externalities, right? So because of the model of how their spreadsheets work, we just ignore that and we move forward. And that basic model is just what's continuing to happen in technology right now. There's an important idea or principle called Campbell's paradox, or Campbell's law, which is that the more a quantitative social indicator is used for decision making, the more subject it will be to corruption, and the more it will corrupt the process that it's meant to measure. I actually thought about that a lot and wrote about that in my first book in relation to schools, because I don't think there's actually any better explanation of what's wrong with our educational system right now than Campbell's law, which shows that if you actually put a lot of importance on a very particular output like test scores, the process by which you get those test scores will be corrupted. It's just actually inevitable. It will lead to corruption and it will distort the whole process. So you have to be very careful what end or output you're going to choose to go for, because everything ends up orienting around that. So that's partly what's happening here. So real progress, better progress, I think, something we need to think about, depends on systematically identifying and internalizing all externalities as far as possible to ensure that the outcomes are better overall. So it includes a different kind of accounting, and it includes having clear values. Like, you actually have to have goals based on values. Like, for instance, valuing the biosphere and life and humans as ends in themselves, and then orienting our systems around those outcomes as opposed to money and power, whatever the sort of default is right now. So we have to take, like, underneath all the hype about AI, these are basic historical patterns and economic patterns that we just keep falling into over and over and over again. But over time, it seems like the stakes get higher, right? So we need to get to the point where we can somehow change the paradigm before the stakes get too high. Some of those thoughts were from a paper written by the Consilience Project, which is a project of the Civilization Research Institute. It's called Development in Progress. And they wrote another piece called Technology is Not Values Neutral. And this is another, I think, key idea. It needs to be named. It's relevant to a lot of things. There's this general idea that technology is neutral. You know, it could be good, it could be bad. It's a tool. But the widespread adoption of new technology always has many unintended consequences, and it always has particular consequences. And it's always informed by values of the people who are creating it, and it always has an impact on our values over time. So we can't totally separate those things. Langdon Winner is somebody who wrote a lot about this and tried to describe what he called the technological orthodoxy, and he described it as nihilistic because it tries to separate values from technology. And this is a basic way of thinking about technology as being separate from questions of values. But when you do that, you end up designing things in a way that he calls nihilistic design, and you end up actually creating unintended outcomes because you're not consciously choosing them. It's going to happen unconsciously. Technology always evolves in clusters. It always creates new technological environments and epochs of culture. It always eventually becomes our environment and shapes our behavior and our culture and our habits. It becomes second nature. It becomes largely obligatory. And it even changes our social status, it changes our norms, it changes our structures of thought, right? Look at the history of humanity and the history of technology and how we change along with the evolution of our technology. So we have to somehow create that more consciously so that we can actually be the humans that we want to be. But at this point, we've sort of created a planetary computational stack unintentionally. And now we're living with the consequences and trying to figure out what the impacts of that will be. So the idea there is that if we continue down the path of nihilistic design, it's not going to lead to good outcomes. We have to actually make a sort of paradigm shift toward what they call axiological design or values-based design. Like, it's actually really simple. It's just the idea that we invent and develop and use technology that we consciously and intentionally choose based on how it's going to impact us. It's a pretty simple idea, and yet it doesn't seem like humans have really caught on to that quite yet. But I believe that we're going to get there. I do. Another related idea is this idea of multipolar traps. Multipolar traps is when you feel like you're in a trap because you can't stop doing something, because if you don't do it, the other person's going to do it. And if they do it, there's the same bad outcome, but actually you're worse off because they also get the short-term benefit. You all get the long-term bad outcome, but they get the short-term benefit, and you don't. So if they're going to do it, you might as well do it. This is again, deep structure of human logic, right? This goes into every war, every economic battle, every competition is sort of a multipolar trap. And many people now with artificial intelligence are arguing, you know, AGI is ultimately inevitable. You can't stop the evolution of technology. Therefore, if there's any, and it might be really dangerous and really bad. It might be like dystopia. Therefore, we got to make sure they don't do it. We have to do it, right? And you hear all the heads of these AI companies, if you haven't heard them, they're literally saying this. And in particular, between the US and China, there's a lot of fear that in this AI race, China might get AGI. Whoever cracks the code and gets AGI first is going to win the game of planetary power. Therefore, we have to throw trillions of dollars into this because we're the good guys, right? It's the oldest story in the book. It's 2025. It's getting kind of lame, in my opinion. But they're still telling it. And that is basically the AI story. So we have to be able to read the headlines and hear that story coming through and realize it's the same bullshit story that our ancestors were telling to their people a long time ago. We can't keep playing to win the game. We have to change the game, right? Somehow we have to change the rules of the game. It's not going to be easy, but I believe we sort of have to wrap our collective heads around it and see what's happening and get a step ahead of it at some point. Another big idea I'll throw out there is this idea of infrastructure, social structure, and superstructure. So infrastructure is like technology, right? And there's a lot of focus on how technology impacts us. Social structure is like laws, culture, norms, and agreements. Superstructure is like our ideas, our values, our principles, right? And I think we need to put more attention on our values and our principles and ideas. And it's only in that way that we can change our social structures and our laws and our systems, and then create and design better infrastructure, right? I feel like that's the order that we as conscious humans have to approach these questions. We have to get our thinking and values straight, then focus on culture and law, and then we can figure out what kind of technology we can create. But right now, we're moving fast and breaking things and creating technology that's having an impact on our laws and culture and our thinking and our values. So it seems to be, and all these things have to work together. It's not just one direction or the other. But we can see that kind of the way it's working right now isn't working well for us. So we have to bring these things better into alignment. And I believe that it's actually through humans taking agency over their own thoughts and principles and values and making sure that the world that is outside of us is reflective of that. It's also important to know that this isn't really just an AI conversation. This kind of dysfunction, it's all most large companies are not mission-driven organizations, right? They're designed and managed and treated as financial products that are optimized to create financial gains. That's what pretty much every business is run as. And we're seeing a real lack of leadership, not just in AI, but if you look at Sony, Boeing, Intel, many governments, many corporations and countries are not functional institutions at the moment, and they don't have strong values-based leadership. And you can't be a functional institution or country if you don't have explicit values and principles that you're actually working with. So this ties back to sort of what I tried to get at in the first lecture, and again a little bit last time, of just we're slowly, painfully waking up to the fact that we need to get out of this sort of nihilistic, relativistic age that we're in and somehow get clear about what our human values are, because it matters. Another thing to know is I'll just say, brains don't produce intelligence. Like AI is not intelligent. And also, you can't replicate brains to be intelligent either. Brains don't create intelligence. People, societies, and cultures create intelligence, right? It's a whole web of living relationships that enables intelligence to emerge. So we have to put the focus where the focus needs to be, which is on human relationships and cultures, to give birth to actual intelligence, right? We can't focus on the sort of the brain or the computer. We have to actually focus on each other. There's a lot I could say about the environment. I think I'm going to cut that part short, but it is important to know that many claims, some of the PR and spin and marketing of AI is that it can solve climate change, right? Like it could really help us, right? We could model the atmosphere and melting better. We can create efficiency gains to decrease material use. We can have technological breakthroughs like fusion and batteries and superconductors. But maybe. But the bottom line right now is that what AI is doing is creating more efficiency, and it's making all of our supply chains more efficient, which just increases the negative outcomes of our supply chains, right? So whatever our problems are, it's making them accelerate. It is making them go faster. 90% of major oil companies are investing in AI. Microsoft and NVIDIA are serving big oil. Most of the top market cap businesses in the world right now are either AI businesses or oil companies that are largely relying on AI to increase their efficiency. And that means a lot of lobbying and a lot of PR and a lot of money spent on messaging, right? And greenwashing and getting people to think that this is a really good and wonderful thing. But so we have to be able to see through that. We just have to. I don't know. We're living in it, but we've got to be able to see through it. Otherwise, we're going to be numbed to the fact that maybe that's not as true as we'd like to believe. So I won't say more about that. I've got numbers and stuff about how bad it is, but I won't go there. There's a good book called The Prehistory of the Cloud, which talks about, like we think of the cloud as this like abstract, the cloud, like all of our folders are just floating through space. But you're actually talking about football field-sized server rooms, right? You're talking about incredible amounts of materials extraction. And there's this interesting relationship between abstraction and extraction, right? Like we're abstracting these ideas like AI and the cloud, but meanwhile, like the extraction of the earth is happening all around us. And we're just sort of disconnected from it. We have to reconnect to like what's actually happening to the planet. We have to bring the abstract and the extract like together somehow. Kate Crawford, in a book called The Atlas of AI, which is over there, also talks a lot about this and this abstraction and extraction and how data is the new oil. It's sort of an abstract kind of oil, right? And it's also the same because it's sort of a commercialized capture of a common thing. Like we have these common resources and they're being taken by certain individuals and they're generating billions and trillions of dollars from that. But we have to find a way to recognize like what is common to all of us, what belongs to all of us, what should be privatized and what shouldn't. And again, this competition between the US and China is really key to what's happening right now, and it justifies a lot of the friendliness between governments and law and corporations because they sort of need each other to make sure that they're on the right side of the winning team. There's an NSA employee who described the culture there as summit fever, right? Like when you're so fixated on reaching the summit, everything else falls away, right? Norms fall away, laws fall away, the ends justify the means, right? And if you have to win, you'll do anything to get there. There's a colonizing impulse there, right? Like one AI to rule them all, right? It's sort of the impulse behind a lot of these companies. And if you listen to the CEOs, though, they're pretty explicit about it. It's sort of hidden in plain sight. So the point is AI is really not the problem, right? The problem is humans, but the good news is we're also the solution, right? I think humans, we're the problem and the solution. We kind of have to deal with it. We can't blame AI for our problems, and we can't look to AI to solve our problems, right? And this sort of dystopia, utopia, like tension that's out there, it's so common for people to be framing the situation we're in right now as, we're either going towards some dystopic nightmare or like some, techno wonderful wonderland where we won't have to work anymore and we'll have robot slaves, but that's okay. And it's just like, it's silly and it's immature. And I think we need to sort of take a longer look in the mirror and realize that it's actually on us. And we have to figure this stuff out, and we have to take responsibility. And only we actually can understand these patterns, like multipolar traps and Campbell's law. LLMs don't understand what the hell those words mean. They can't see, that's a multipolar trap. I'm going to avoid that and change my thinking and feeling and willing and behavior so as not to get caught in that trap. They don't even have the intelligence of plants. Like, they're not going to get there. We have to do it. We have to see these things and understand these things and act accordingly. So let's talk a little bit about natural intelligence, right? What is human intelligence? How do we actually cultivate the natural intelligence that'll actually get us to where we want to go, as opposed to digital computation, which is all AI is? And on this, I'll be tracking, I've been influenced by a woman named Jill Nephew. She started an organization called Inquire, which looks at how tech interacts with the human mind for individual and collective sense-making. Also, my friend Zach Stein has a lot of thoughts about this that I'll be drawing from. So the thing to know about natural intelligence is that it requires ongoing feedback from reality, right? It has to be embodied. Life is always changing and evolving. It can't be in a program. It can't be in a data set. It has to be ongoingly in relationship to reality directly. And the space of reality is larger than we can imagine. All digital input is just a mirror of a sliver of reality that can be recorded in binary code. That's not all of reality. Something that can't interface with the world of biological and cultural reality can't be aligned with it. And we can't predict how it will act based on its inherently limited inputs and models. Our natural human intelligence solves what's known as the binding problem in cognitive science. The binding problem is this unbelievable and unexplainable fact that all the features and attributes of sensory experience, all of our evolutionary past, and all of our experiential present all come together in one experience of reality. The mind pulls it all together and gives a coherent representation of reality right now. Like, that's what's happening right now. Our minds are solving the binding problem. AI could never, it's unfathomable that a machine could do that. It just doesn't even make sense. And it's only possible from a point of view, right? There's no abstract resolution to that. Like, there's no view from nowhere, right? There's only embodied perspectives on reality, which we coordinate via natural intelligence, right, in relationship with each other. We know so much more than we know, right? Like, it's just crazy. Like, if we're sitting on a hill at dusk and I point to the sunset, there's no way to capture that, the meaning that's possible there. We could spend the rest of our lives writing poetry about that sunset. It wouldn't exhaust the meaning that's there, right? It's a combinatorial explosion of like actual meaning, like what that could mean to us. It's a felt, embodied, realized experience. You can't reduce that to a model or to data. You just can't. We have to see that and appreciate that. A chatbot is not even simulating a person having an experience, right? It's only simulating the linguistic output of experience, not experience itself. The experience is electricity running through a server room, right? It's binary ones and zeros. It's the experience of a flip being switched, just the same as any other electronic technology. So when we think about intelligence and consciousness and the potential for AGI and what it means to be human, we have to think about these kinds of distinctions. Like, silicon chips are either conscious or not, but hooking them together and running a lot of electricity through them, I don't think fundamentally changes that. And cognition is tied to experience, right? LLMs are not having an experience. Intelligence is tied to the evolution of the unbroken chain of experience that has happened on this planet. It's beyond our imagination and calculation, and it can't be reduced to a model or data. It can't be replicated in another system. And anything that's worthy of the name superintelligence, which is actually a word that gets thrown around a lot in reference to AGI, anything that would be worthy of that name would have to be able to successfully navigate all of life in an omni-considerate way, right? Meaning you're taking account of all factors of all living beings and acting accordingly. And super duper data calculations can't do that, right? Only we can do that. That's what natural intelligence is and allows. And I think it would be wonderful if people would just appreciate that a little bit more, because then maybe they could live into it a little bit more. We have this widely held view that we can't trust our own cognition, right? It's like we're biased, right? We're wrong about everything. And that's only partly true, but it's mostly not true, I think. And it largely depends on our cognitive environments. Like, our sense-making comes from our ability to be embodied and embedded in an environment that gives us the constraints we need to enable our cognition. And AI is degrading our cognitive environment and actually making us less trustworthy, ironically. And we are fallible and we are biased, but we can correct that, right? Like, it's a process. We can correct our errors through social processes that are connected to people who are embedded in reality. That's how we figure out what's true. And we do figure out what's true. And we do know what's true. We all say 20 true things every day. It's not that hard. So we have to own that ability again too. But we need our information to be grounded in reality and not influenced by fabrications. The world that we live in, it's open-ended, it's dynamic, it's infinitely complex, right? A data set is not a world. And intelligence without a world it'd be like sound in a vacuum, right? It's impossible. And language that's severed from that process of living reality it has no meaningful context, therefore it can't be true. Like, truth only exists in a particular context. Language without context can't be true. LLM generated content is not, it's neither true nor false. It's like it can't lie, right? An LLM can't lie. It can produce a lot of bullshit, but it can't lie. In order to lie, you have to know the truth. Bullshit means you just throw a bunch of stuff out there you don't care about or know about what's true. So it does do that really well, but we should be aware of what the difference is. So one of the sort of sad truth I'm driving at here is it's sort of another way of coming at the tragedy of our postmodern moment, is that people don't know who they are, right? It's our deepest vulnerability and desire to find our place and know who we are, right? And we're all indigenous to this planet, and we seem to be losing our grounding and our sense of belonging. And we can only really know this to be true if we know it in our own interior experience. So I want to say a little bit more about that, and also implications for education, because maybe some of you are sort of expecting or wanting that. I should say something about education. And on that front, I'll also be following some of the thoughts, more of the thoughts of Jill Nephew and my friend Zach Stein. Because, and one way to think about this is thinking about education more broadly, really in terms of socialization, right? Like, the education of children is their whole full-scale socialization, right? Like, the family is educating them, society is educating them, computers are educating them. It's not just about school. It's about really the experience of being a young human who's learning how to be a human. And on this front, we also need to be aware of one of the main applications of AI, and one of the projected future applications of AI especially, is sort of chatbot relationships, right? Like tutors. Having a tutor, which could grow into having a teacher who needs teachers anymore. When you have this like perfect, infallible, supposedly AI tutor, at that point, who needs parents, right? The bot can just raise you. A lot of people think that's actually the direction that we're going. I mean, you sure could save a lot of labor that way, right? Parents wouldn't have to be parents anymore. How wonderful would that be? But seriously, emotional AI is becoming one of the dominant applications, right? They're trying to figure out how to replicate humans so much that we actually develop emotional attachments to them. Here's a quote from a site that's literally advertising one of these things. Chatbots with emotional intelligence are essential in helping people who are struggling with mental health problems. These AIs can recognize signs of stress and provide sympathetic responses. So, if chatbots are essential in helping people with mental health problems, that means you literally need a chatbot if you have mental health problems. I strongly disagree, in case you can't tell. This is on Microsoft's website. Go to Microsoft.com and you can find this. She has a staggering 660 million online users worldwide. Her popularity is such that she ranks among China's most admired celebrities. Her talents appear to have no bounds. She is a poet, a painter, a presenter, a news pundit, and a lot more. She is Xiao Ice, Microsoft's China-based chatbot phenomenon. So just the fact that they're referring to this machine as a she, I want to point out, is pretty problematic. And the fact that chatbots are interacting with people using the pronoun I think is deeply problematic. We're going to need to regulate that and make it so that that's illegal. I think that's pretty clear, because the thing that's being developed there is a fundamentally manipulative, right? You're literally trying to get someone to develop an attachment to this thing as if it were a human, and it's fundamentally not. And there's a technological and economic race to create this kind of pseudo-intimacy. And it's a deep human need, right, that's being hijacked. It's an ersatz intimacy. It's a pseudo-intimacy. It's not really real. And I have to think that it can only increase narcissism to interact with what is effectively a reflection of yourself and something that is designed to tell you what you want to hear. How could that possibly be good for your mental health? So, my view and Zach's view and others' view is that changes in socialization and education are actually more concerning than job losses, right? People talk a lot about people losing their jobs to AI, but what might be more fundamental is people losing the environments in which humans can grow into humans. I think that might be even more fundamental. And we do use different mental processes when we carry out a task on our own than when we use something like an LLM. Like learning requires learning, if we think about learning for a minute, it requires the struggle that automation seeks to relieve us of, right? Like, and that's just the short answer to like, should you use an LLM like to do your homework or any meaningful work where you're supposed to be learning? The answer is no. The work is the point, obviously, right? Like, it's about cultivating the ability within yourself. It's all about what's happening within you that matters. It's not about the output. And that fundamental disconnect is like, we're so focused on outputs, we're not attending to what's happening inside of us. But anthropomorphic AI, again, it's made to be deceptive. And any machine that's built to pretend to be a human is in a mode of ongoing manipulation, right? I think this is sort of something that I think we as a culture are going to have to get clear about so that we can regulate it better. Inside these bots, there's nothing like a person who's producing text on the screen, right? It's an epistemological error to think of a machine as a person. So we have to be able to ask the question, is it a moral error to design systems that systematically deceive people? Right? I would say yes. I feel like it's a moral error to design systems that systematically deceive people, and that's what's happening. That's what's being promoted. That's what's being sold. So again, there's a fundamental difference between human attention and machine surveillance, right? We're being surveilled, but we're not being attended to. And there's this deep human need that we have for real attention and intimacy, and we're just not getting it. And while we're sort of being distracted by talk about utopia and dystopia, humans are struggling to retain their sense of personhood and their sense of sovereignty over their own inner experience. One of the last things I'll say about children and education is that we also need to understand the co-presence of another embodied human that's sharing your reality is what it actually enables the emergence of your sense of self in the first place, right? So if you think about children, we need to be in a shared reality with other human beings to even realize that we are a self. If we're putting children in relationships with machines instead of embodied beings who share their reality, it's going to have a significant impact on their sense of selfhood. That it should be clear and obvious, so I hope it is, but I also feel like these things need to be said and spoken into the culture. Bottom line is we can't create pseudo-humans who are going to meet our human needs. We have to meet them ourselves. We can't unload our responsibilities for climate change or for changing the economy or whatever onto AI. We have to take it on ourselves. We can't even model and plan for reality. Like, we can't have a program for morality. We can't plug things into a computer and have it tell us what to do. It's like, I feel like this is the fundamental truth that we want to avoid maybe collectively, is that we have to face the fact that we're responsible. We can't pass it off. You know, as Lewis Mumford said, life cannot be delegated, right? To be alive is to be implicated. We're all implicated. We're all responsible. We have to own it, and we have to just keep trying our best. Last book I'll mention, the one I'll maybe recommend the most, if I was going to recommend one, it's called The AI Mirror by Shannon Valor. I think it's pretty clear. It's pretty concise. And she really emphasizes that, you know, the two major problems are concentration of wealth and power, which I talked about a bit, and this erosion of moral and political confidence in ourselves, right? And the former perpetuates the latter because people are trying to convince us that AI is going to be better than us. AI is going to be less biased than us and able to solve our problems for us, right? But it's a taking our agency away from us. And according to Valor, it's not the machines that are scary, it's the rhetoric that gaslights people into surrendering their power and their confidence in their agency and their freedom. That's the real threat, because that's what enables us to feel like we can take our hands off the wheel, right, and let AI take over. Virtues are acquired by practice. AI tools change our character by changing our behavior, right? We have to attend to how we're thinking and behaving so that we cultivate the virtues we need to create the world we want. We're degrading our capacity for moral wisdom at exactly the moment when the future of humanity depends on us having it, and we therefore have to recognize the intrinsic value of human participation in moral and political thinking, right? We have to take up our responsibility to actually think about some of this stuff for ourselves. So that's really the gist of it, of what I wanted to share. I do believe that in a way it's a very optimistic and empowering message in my mind, in the sense of like, it's about us reclaiming our agency, understanding how the technology works that we're creating, understand how and why to use it and how and why not to use it. I think that's possible. We have the capacity to understand ourselves and take responsibility for the world. That capacity may be being undermined in some ways at the moment in our current environment. So we need to do something about that. But we can each as individuals sort of take responsibility for that ourselves in our own lives. And as some of us were talking about at lunch today, actually, my sense of what it boils down to, in a way, to make it concrete at an individual level, is that attention is really the key, right? Like how we spend our attention, how we use our attention to cultivate the capacities and the intelligence and the humanity that we have the potential for. We really are all free to do that. No one is stopping us. And I believe that we can. But we're also, it seems like we're in a place collectively where some of the old forms and habits and structures for holding our attention are breaking down, right? And we're in a sort of liminal in-between place. And we have to create new forms and new structures and new cultures where we have a joint shared attention toward like meaningful and purposeful and valuable things together. And in a way, I think that's all we have to do. I have a list of guidelines for like technology and for people, but I think I'll actually just stop there. If people have a question related to guidelines, we could go there. Let me just open the space to see if there's any questions or thoughts. Thank you for listening. I do really appreciate it, and I'd love to hear if there's any thoughts in the room or questions in the room.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated it. You're recording it. How is this accessible?
Oh, it'll be on YouTube. Yeah, I've got a channel on YouTube, so all my stuff goes there.
I know some people who couldn't do that.
Yeah, please share it. I do think this topic is pretty relevant. Can't go a day without hearing those two letters. So yeah, hopefully people will be interested. I know it's long and I know it's a lot. I have a good friend who lives in Europe who's always trying to convince me to, I got to make that 5-minute viral video, at least like do the TED Talk version. Like I got to get my message, got to get your message out there, more in a more like snazzy, concise way. And maybe there's some truth to that, but I feel like I like being able to give things the time and attention that they need, and I hope that people are willing to listen. Yeah, thanks.
Very inspiring.
Thanks.
One thing that, I think us generations, we are, this makes sense to us, but one of my concerns is being able to communicate these concerns in digestible bites for young people.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're like ready and hungry for this, because they don't know any
Yeah.
better. And I just have no idea how to engage, the Gen Alpha, Gen Z, about these dangers without sounding like I'm this outdated old person that's not embracing the technology.
Yeah.
So it'd be great to have like conversation, some suggestions for conversation pieces and
Yeah.
for the younger generation.
Yeah, I think in a way we all have to, whatever position we're in, like as a parent or as a teacher, we have to digest and understand what's happening as best we can so that we can tailor what we say and share with our beloved young person in the way that's best for them in that moment, right? So that's got to be based on that relationship. I answer that own question with my own daughter in a different way than I can answer it for anybody else's child. And as a teacher, you can try to build a relationship with your students where you find the ways in which they're going to hear something that would be helpful for them. Same as a parent. So there's rarely a general answer. It's always about relationships and intention. But I feel like it would be a huge step in the right direction if people of our generation had clarity and intention on the problem and how to live. If we had that, we actually wouldn't have a problem, right? Like that's what we don't have. So we have to get adults to wake up a little bit to be better leaders and better mentors. And one of the dynamics that I see happening in culture right now is it's actually related to this abdication of responsibility theme. I see adults in general abdicating that responsibility and handing too much of it over to children. And there's a failure of leadership at the CEO level and at the government level and at the family level. So it's on you, it's on me, it's on us. I think we all have to find our way with it. I mean, there's certainly more than enough information. So whatever comes up as relevant. I do think that like the talks that I'm giving here, I do think are appropriate for my 15-year-old daughter. And we do talk about these things. And then there's certain structures and limits that are appropriate and healthy for a child to have. Like, if adults could come to the recognition that smartphones are not for children, they're designed for adults, that would help a lot. So, there's relatively simple things. Part of the challenge is the answers are actually pretty simple. What's really hard is being the adult who's actually healthy and clear and not having their attention distracted. And not being co-opted by the environment as well. So it's that you sort of you got to put your own air mask on first, too.
If I could also just jump in to answer that in my role. It's interesting because Brad and I spoke yesterday, and in a way I was asking Brad the opposite. Instead of the 5-minute condensed TED talk, I was like, can you make this a 3-month series and slow it way down? Because one thing I have found in speaking with young children is when we give them just a lot of information around this, they can feel criticized, actually. They can interpret information as a criticism. Like, well, this is my world. What do I do? I can't help it. And it doesn't actually feel that helpful to give them more information about what's wrong with it. It actually feels more helpful to recognize that what we're trying to do is inspire them in the process of their learning, like in terms of the education, like that maybe you don't find the answer right away, but that leads you, that the reward is in the searching. And to bring that alive for a young person, and that they shouldn't fall into the trap of just producing the results, but trust that even if they don't get an A on the paper, because a lot of kids are geared toward the exam result or whatever it is, and they're not thinking about how they're transforming in the process. So the few times I've encouraged kids to really slow down, don't worry about where you're going, but what's your process here, and finding meaning in that, it actually, I think there's less of a tendency to feel overwhelmed by the information. Then they're more interested to find out about the dangers, and not overwhelmed by them. Yeah. I don't know if that's helpful at all, but yeah.
Very much what I was. It's about relationship and over time.
But I have found this thing of
Over
kids
time.
feeling criticized almost, like when we give them all this information. It's not my fault. This is my world. Sorry. What do you want want me to do? Like this kind of like,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, that's fair. It's definitely not their fault. And it's natural for young people to sort of identify with the norms and behaviors of their culture and their social group. That is part of the identity that they're forging, is as that culture and group, separate from you, old, boring, wise one. So it's a real challenge, but that's why, again, it's slow, it's relationship, it's over time, it's modeling, it's, but also the flip side of that is, though, when those defenses are down and in those vulnerable moments, they see it and acknowledge it also. Many, if not most, if not almost all, young people in one way or another are at the point now where they are seeing and realizing and acknowledging the problem. Many young people will say, yes, I can, oh, it's so bad for me when I'm on Instagram, but I just can't stop or whatever. It's like, it is clear enough, the evidence is in, the jury's in. So I feel like we are sort of maybe turning a corner there too, in terms of like, I mean, in some ways they're probably tired of hearing about it, like it's so banal, but it's not necessarily easy to get out of it. It would really help to have a social group, and I mean at the individual level, it's hoping and helping that they find a micro subculture that is healthier than average, but not everyone can do that by definition. So it's a pickle.
That's the big question, because there's not an alternative. There's not really for most people. There's no alternative. Turn.
Yeah, alternative. I mean, it's interesting because it's an interesting dilemma. There are alternatives, and we can create them, but there's obviously a numbers problem in terms of like how many people there are. But I mean, I think it's technically and literally true that every person could enact their agency in such a way.
More easily than as a child.
Yeah, it depends on a lot of factors. Not all of which are controllable. But I think we can see the directionality that we want to go in, and we can all do our best to sort of contribute to going in the right direction. And we all sort of have a truly unique role to play that we can only answer for ourselves.
Thank you.
Mm.
I think what you said in the beginning, the problem is really what I think human beings don't really know who we are. We, ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this starts in the home, it starts when children are little. What is really the purpose in life? What is my value? What is the value of a human being in general? And that's why this intelligence, nobody can take that over. So
Yeah.
and that's what you mentioned right in the beginning. I think that's really where we have to start. Really.
Yeah, and that's why, ultimately it's why we're here. Like there's resonance in the room and in the school for a lot of reasons, and it's something to build on, and we're all really fortunate. I just want to name really explicitly that, my intention here, both tonight and ongoingly at this school, is just we have to try to create the kind of culture that enables young people to know who they are, to transcend multipolar traps, to actually live with purpose and value in a way that's not captured or nudged or behaviorally modified by whatever infrastructure or social system they happen to be living in. I don't know what else to do. That's the best I can do. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just was wondering, like you said, we're all here for a reason, and because we're all sort of aware and working towards this, and hopefully so are our children. And, there is a certain power in leading by example as parents and then passing that on to our children. And I think that my experience is that actually a lot of young people are actually really aware and really interested in sort of getting on board with this
Mhm.
But is that really enough?
Mhm.
You know, and like,
Mhm.
if it's not enough, then what else should we be doing, or we should be encouraging or expecting our kids to be doing, or
Yeah.
to be modeling for our kids, you know, except to just not be part of that system.
Yeah. Yeah. No, is opting out enough? What else can we do? What is enough in general? I mean, a lot of the questions that we're going to come to have a similar structure. And in some ways, I mean, they almost mirror the structure of the desire we have to get like a general answer from something other than ourselves. You know, like it's different. Like it's fundamentally different. Like what can I do is very different than like I'm not going to do anything. AI do it for me. But there's some similarity in that we have to come back to the fact that actually we all can only answer the question for ourselves. And it literally, I believe, is a truly unique answer for everyone. And like it's your journey to figure that out. And that's what they need to know and be convinced of, I think. Like, I believe every person and every child should be empowered to actually believe and know that it's their job and purpose and mission to figure out the answers to their deepest questions. And like, that's their path. Like, they should be reading books or meditating or doing whatever they need to do to figure that out for themselves. And so should you, and so should I, and so should everyone. So there's no general answer, you know, and there's no algorithm for that, you know. It's just like, who's my unique self? What is my unique purpose here? Like right here, right now. Like, why am I in Kimberton? What can I do here? You know, and I feel like, yeah, it's our journey to sort of be at peace, to sort of come to peace with whatever our existential and sort of conditional, geographical, surface level situation is. Like, how do you fully make peace with it and own it and just live through it as consciously as you can?
Thank you so much for this. I really see the through line you've created. Two things kind of come up from what you shared tonight. One is that at the end there you've described kind of the human experience. Clearly everything you described before that did not feel human. For me, it felt more ego-driven, the financial, economical incentive you spoke of. And two, I found myself going down the rabbit hole. What is my purpose? Those big questions come up. Why am I here? And if I outsource all my power to this, you know, algorithm, this language model, and I let it do all the human for me, then I find myself thinking, well, in a world like that, at infinitum, I wouldn't need to be here anymore. I would not need to exist. So, in engaging in that, am I creating a world in which I exit from?
Yeah, and that is close to the worldview of a lot of people and a lot of really powerful people. A big part of what I left out of my talk tonight was actually really taking a close look at the worldview of transhumanists, accelerationists, effective altruists, techno-optimists. Like, what does that worldview really imply? And what are some people like Sam Altman and Elon on record saying? Things like, the biological is just here to boot load the silicon, right? Like, there are many people who are orienting toward a transhumanist world where we are not only are we not necessary, like our purpose is just to succeed to silicon and machines. I believe that's a deep misunderstanding and just existential, philosophical, metaphysical error that they're making. And I think we can understand and explain sort of why and how they're making that mistake. So you're right to sort of sense into that. I think that is the implication. Once you kind of go down that road, once you buy into materialism, then it's really easy to get to a place of nihilism, not just cynicism and relativism, but actual nihilism where nothing matters. And that's not where we want to go. We got to pull people back from there somehow. And actually, I'm thinking my next lecture now is going to be, I'm going to take some of that material and look more closely at that mind and that worldview, and then try to look at the brain and actually like the nature of reality, so that we can look at how we actually sort of show that that's wrong, and that there's a better view and there's a better way to understand sort of who we are and why we're here than that sort of materialist humans don't matter view.
And on hope, maybe.
Yeah, I'll always try. I'll always try. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it is, the truth is very hopeful. You know, the truth is very hopeful, I think. Because part of what I tried to weave in tonight, I believe that we can know the truth. Like we know truth, goodness, and beauty. We actually do. And we have to live as such and believe as such and know as such, and that we have to understand and appreciate the fact that us and the cosmos are a singular thing. Like we're looking through the eyes of the universe, and therefore there's no actual separation. Therefore the truth is possible because it's just one thing. But we know that in a way, like in our own experience. It's not abstract. It's not an idea. It's not something that can be explained by physics or math or biology or psychology. It's actually known directly. You have to know it anthro-ontologically, which is what my friends Zach and Mark say. Yeah. Yeah. But that's, and then you get into, and that's why attention is important. Like attention and awareness and consciousness are things that we know directly in a completely unmediated way. And that is possible. But any articulation of that is already a step removed. So you have to actually, that's why people spend a long time in monasteries, so they can realize it for themselves and not just what their teacher tells them. So, many people, myself included, think that the actual human culture of the future includes more things like monasteries, more things like adult educational structures for lifelong learning, which includes learning the arts of contemplation. Yeah. Sorry, I went on a bit of a tangent there. Anything else, please?
Just a practical question about the AI tutors. I know your band of folks thinks about it a lot. What do you think the pressures will be on schools? Let's assume they're good, but not good morally, but let's assume they're very effective at reaching outcomes. Granted, the earlier points about measurements failing to be useful once they're known to be the measurements. But what happens? What do you think the pressures on schools will be? And how will you think about it? Not to just frame it negatively, but like, what will schools do? How will you think about it when, like, you can just prove that interacting with this tool is better than a different method that people typically use? Like, the easiest ones is already like really kind of upscaled versions of what you might call flashcards for learning math, where they can already pretty much prove that they can teach kids faster math with AI versions of flashcards where they're correcting the kid's error live. The kid selects the wrong question. The AI kind of knows why they did that, can explain to them very well, keep up with their prior failures, know exactly how they learned the last thing, so the new teacher doesn't come in and, like these are a lot of these public school problems, frankly, not Waldorf where they have the same teacher for the long term. But what do you think the pressures will be on schools when that becomes like this, known policy that works?
Yeah, the pressure will be tremendous. It already is. I mean, most of what I see about AI is incredibly positive and just jumping on that bandwagon. And that's what most people will do. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure and a lot of going along, and a lot of young children spending a lot of time interacting with non-humans.
To follow up on that, I think that we're pretty likely to head to a situation where most people do use those tools a lot. I mean, it'll be obvious. You'll start with people that are in terrible schools or can't get schools at all. We'll say, here's an AI tool, and their outcomes will drastically improve. They'll get increased incomes and stuff like this, and then it'll probably take over more and more stuff as it gets better, and then there'll probably be some small percentage of kind of Luddite holdouts, or what'll be called that. I'm wondering whether, it seems like Waldorf has enough of a point of view to not get pushed around by that, but we might be in a situation where like you would have to drive several hours to find another school that doesn't use that as a primary source, and that could be in like 5 years, 10 years.
Maybe. I don't see a lot of value in making predictions about 5 years or 10 years because I just don't know. I think that
in school, like model it
no,
like
no, I think the pressures will be great. I think a lot of people will do that, and I think it will be bad for kids. But I think that a prediction about like how far you'll have to drive to find a sane Waldorf school is meaningful to me because I do think that these things are already becoming clearer. I think the problems are already becoming clear. I want to hold out hope and just rational logic that many, if not most, and maybe eventually all people will actually find a healthier path for their children. And that's not to say, I wouldn't say that it's like all or nothing. I wouldn't say that you could never use AI-assisted technology. It's all about, it would really come down to ratios of like human-to-human contact. You could create a decentralized educational society where there's effectively no schools and people spend more time with each other on average than they do now. I mean, right now the average teenager looks at their phone about like 10 hours a day or something. It's pretty nuts. So we could do better. We could do better, like you could be using a really effective AI tutoring system for 1 or 2 hours a day and have your screen time other than that be pretty limited and be in a much healthier situation than most kids are in right now. So I'm actually not completely opposed to AI tutoring. I'm completely opposed to it displacing human-to-human contact, which is kind of already happening, but what we see in the short term is that accelerating. So it's going to get worse. The pressure will increase. The problem will probably get worse before it gets better. But it'll get better because it's a problem. Problems have consequences. People react to consequences. So we'll figure it out. But in the meantime, let's try to cause as little suffering as possible for people.
But I just want to say thank you again.
Yeah.
I actually found this very hopeful.
Good.
In the sense that it showed me that humans will never become obsolete.
Yes. Never. Of course not.
So long as you're here.
Yeah.
They cannot.
Was there any doubt? Come on. Yeah.
No, but I think if anything, eventually, like through the struggle, through our eyes being open and learning, we will realize that and actually come to a place of deep meaning.
Yeah.
But sometimes you have to go through the woods.
Yeah, apparently you do. It's an initiation of sorts. You know, we've got to move through it. The only way out is through. Yeah, thank you. May it be so. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.